Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Tidbits. My name is Kristina Koopman, and as always, thanks for joining me. I think it's safe to say that we all know there's no one way to become or to be an artist. What does being an artist even actually mean? We're taught growing up that talent and hard work are enough to make it, and that famous or successful people are found on their merits alone. The truth is unfortunately a little bit more cynical than that, however. Circumstance and politics can play just as big of a role as talent and vision. I read an article recently that I found to be very fascinating. It features American abstractionist painter Lee Krasner, quoting her from various interviews and articles over the years. She struggled for decades to emerge from the shadow of her superstar husband, Jackson Pollock, but she is now widely considered to be one of the most important artists of the Abstract Expressionist movement. It's a movement that's widely considered one of the first American art styles. This article highlights several words of wisdom from Lee Krasner, touching upon the importance of persistence, spontaneity, failure, and risk. Let's take a deeper look at what she had to say. Support was not easy to come by for Lee Krasner. Compliments of her early work were laced with blatant sexism. Quote, "This is so good, you wouldn't know it was done by a woman." End quote. From Hans Hofmann, 1937, an instructor at Krasner's school. Other mid-20th century art world gatekeepers, like Peggy Guggenheim, disregarded her work completely. But Krasner's will to paint was stronger than any snubs. As a young adult, Krasner also became passionately involved in activist efforts that championed artists' rights. As a member of American abstract artists in the late 1930s and 40s, she poured her energy into promoting abstract art, still considered a vanguard movement at the time, and demanded more exhibition opportunities for its artists. Around the same time, Krasner joined the WPA's Federal Art Project, a wartime effort that hired artists to swathe the country in public art and, in turn, help boost the faltering economy. For one mural, Krasner led a team of 10 men. She also became a vociferous member of the WPA Artists Union. These efforts were time-consuming, but ultimately they offered the burgeoning painter more space and support to make her art. When it came to combating the art establishment's deep-seated sexism, Krasner's approach was more subtle. Quote, "I couldn't run out and do a one-woman job on the sexist aspects of the art world, continue my painting, and stay in the role I was in as Mrs. Pollock. I just couldn't do that much." End quote. Instead, Krasner played the long game, focusing on her practice and slowly but determinedly establishing a space for her work amongst her male peers. Quote, "What I considered important was that I was able to work," she continued. "You have to brush a lot of stuff out of the way, or you get lost in the jungle." End quote. Throughout her painting practice, Krasner welcomed change with gusto. In the early 1940s, just after studying with Hans Hofmann, her canvases swayed with geometric forms that, quote, "gave cubism a rhythmic swing." A quote from master abstractionist Piet Mondrian. He also commented on the, quote, "very strong inner rhythm of the works." Despite positive feedback, Krasner hungrily explored other styles, searching for an aesthetic that more powerfully harnessed her emotions. Krasner had her first significant break, her word for the stylistic shifts in her practice, after meeting Jackson Pollock in 1942. The two artists fed off of each other, and by 1946, Krasner began her Little Image series. The small compositions are packed tightly with bursts of symbols and repetitive strokes. She long touted them as her best work. Krasner embraced, even celebrated, these periodic reinventions. She believed they set her apart from her contemporaries, many of whom stuck doggedly to a single style. Quote, I find myself working for a stretch of time, somewhere between 4 and 5 years, on something, and then a break will occur, and I have to go with it. End quote. She explained in a 1964 interview. Quote, in a sense, I find it a little offbeat compared to a great many of my contemporaries. There's been many transitions in my work, and I expect that as long as I continue painting. By now, I accept that this is the way it moves for me. End quote. Likewise, Krasner delighted in unexpected changes that occurred during the process of painting itself. Quote, I'm not interested in a prior theory when I paint my picture, because I think you get an awful lot of dead painting that way. Not interesting, dead, sterile. Well, that's not very exciting, for heaven's sake. One wants to discover. End quote. She allowed the action and rhythm of painting to take over, responding instinctively to unanticipated gestures or forms. This often manifested in decisions related to her palette. Quote, color for me is a very mysterious thing. I might say I haven't done anything in blue, so I'm going to use blue, but then it's like it comes out green or crimson or something, end quote, she explained in an interview. Quote, I'm aware of that. I'm conscious of that kind of thing, but I don't try to change it. I don't say it's got to be blue, and I insist on letting it go the way it's going to go, rather than forcing it, end quote. In Krasner's view, these moments of letting go powered her best paintings, not to mention her own happiness. Krasner often described her process as a pendulum. Quote, it seems to swing back to something I was involved with earlier, or it moves between horizontality and verticality, circularity, or a composite of them, end quote, she said in a 1973 catalog published by the Whitney Museum. Quote, for me, I suppose that change is the only constant, end quote. Indeed, Krasner often returned to past work, reinventing failed projects as new, fervent compositions. Krasner's torn paper collages boldly evidence this habit. In several interviews, she described their origin story with the pride of having fixed something terribly broken. Quote, I did a batch of drawings. I had them pinned up in the whole studio. Then I went in one day, and I hated them, so I tore them all up and threw them on the floor. When I went into the studio again, which was several days later, they actually looked pretty good that way. End quote. In Krasner's hands, a group of failed drawings transformed into an important facet of her practice, one that informed the spatial and compositional structure of her paintings. Quote, this seems to be a work process of mine. I'm constantly going back to something I did earlier, remaking it, doing something else with it, and coming forth with another, more clarified image. End quote. From then on, Krasner consistently revisited unsuccessful or unresolved works with fresh eyes, and in many cases, these discards stimulated some new stylistic or conceptual directions. Quote, I started going through a lot of work that dissatisfied me in the beginning, destroying in order to recreate. End quote. There is no single way to be an artist, no guidebook on what steps to take to guarantee success. Lee Krasner shows us that long-term, consistent work and flexibility are key. These are also great traits to apply to any pursuit or goal. I'm thankful to see that Lee Krasner's work is finally receiving the attention it deserved all along, and much of that is due to her determination.